The Phantom Requiem of the Étoile Opera House. At the heart of an ancient, mist-laden city stood the Étoile Opera House, an architectural marvel whose ethereal grandeur was matched only by its mysterious reputation. From a distance, it seemed a place of wonder and light, towering spires reaching toward the heavens, its polished marble facade shimmering with hints of gold under the pale moon. Every corner, every arch, every intricate stone carving seemed to dance with artistry, as if the opera house itself was alive and breathing, imbued with the power of countless performances that had taken place within its hallowed halls. But those who ventured closer knew better. For beneath its polished surface lay secrets older than the stones themselves. The opera house was an immense, labyrinthine structure. The grand entrance hall, adorned with chandeliers of crystal and silver, stretched out beneath a ceiling fresco depicting gods and mortals entangled in a cosmic dance. Every step across the marble floor echoed like whispers in a forgotten language. Gilded staircases spiraled upwards to the balconies, where red velvet drapes cascaded from the walls, pooling like rivers of blood. The scent of incense, mingled with aged wood and the faintest touch of old parchment, lingered in the air. To enter the Étoile Opera House was to walk between two worlds. There was the world of the living, where singers and dancers performed tales of love, war, and tragedy. And then, there was the other world, the world that began when the performances ended or paused. The backstage was a twisting maze of dimly lit corridors, where props and costumes seemed to shift and move on their own. Mirrors were best avoided here, for one never knew whether their own reflection would greet them, or something else. The deeper one went into the opera house, the stranger things became. The ancient halls beneath the stage were seldom traversed, said to be inhabited by things far older than music. But none of these whispered horrors held a candle to the peculiar and infamous residents of the Étoile Opera House, the Sandwich Rats. The Sandwich Rats. These creatures were unlike any others in the opera house. Roughly the size of a house cat, they appeared as skeletal rats, no fur or flesh to speak of, just bones. Their glowing, phosphorescent forms gave them an otherworldly presence, casting a ghostly light wherever they roamed. The Sandwich Rats glowed in shades of white, blue, green, and sometimes purple, their colors swirling faintly like the embers of a dying fire. Their skulls were disproportionately large, grotesquely oversized, giving their small skeleton bodies an unbalanced, eerie look. Their front paws were almost comically tiny, but their speed and coordination as they scurried about was no laughing matter. Though they did not make a sound, the cold air that followed them was unmistakable. The Sandwich Rats only made their presence known during intermissions, the brief moments of respite when the grand performances ceased, and the audience left their seats for refreshments or quiet conversation. For some strange reason, it was during these intervals that the Sandwich Rats awoke, prowling the aisles, the dressing rooms, and the foyer like spectral scavengers. They traveled in packs of several, their glowing forms casting eerie shadows as they moved silently in unison. Most unsettling of all, the Sandwich Rats were not mere spectators of the opera's intermissions. They were predators, in a sense, though their prey was not easily defined. The creatures had a tendency to swarm visitors, especially those who lingered too long in the darkened halls or those who seemed to wander away from the safety of the crowd. They would crawl up legs, gnaw at shoes with their bony jaws, or clamber up to try and reach hands and faces with their tiny claws. At first, many guests believed the rats were harmless, but the truth quickly became apparent. The longer one allowed the creatures to crawl, the more aggressive and bold they became. Their swarming presence would grow, with more rats joining the fray as though drawn by the scent of fear. Though they could not cause physical harm, their ghostly bites sent chills up the spine, and their touch carried an unnerving sense of dread. Fighting off the sandwich rats. There were those who had learned how to deal with the sandwich rats, and they passed their wisdom down through whispered tales between performances. The key was to act quickly, never let them surround you for long. While they were persistent, the sandwich rats were also skittish when it came to direct confrontation. A well-placed kick, scattering them in all directions, was often enough to disorient the pack. Each time a rat was kicked away, it would tumble into the darkness and vanish from sight, only to appear later if its comrades still lingered. It was important to scatter the pack. Separating the rats from one another seemed to break their collective will. As long as the group remained together, they grew bolder, more ferocious. If a visitor failed to act swiftly, the rats would summon reinforcements, and soon, entire swarms would descend upon them, biting and scratching with increased fervor. Those who had faced the rats before knew better than to stand still for too long. They would kick one rat to the left, another to the right, all the while moving, keeping the pack disorganized. After several kicks, the rats would begin to lose their resolve, scattering into the shadows and disappearing, leaving their victim in peace, for a time, at least. The ghosts of the étoile. The sandwich rats were but one of many supernatural residents of the opera house. Higher up, in the shadowed balconies where the wealthy used to watch performances in times long past, strange figures could be seen hovering in the dark. Their faces were never fully visible, only the faint outlines of their elegant garments and flickering forms, as if they were still watching the grand performances of centuries gone by. In the depths below the stage, where the most ancient rooms lay forgotten, more sinister things lurked. These were the creatures of legend, spoken of in the oldest accounts of the opera house. It was said that, at the time of its construction, the Étoile Opera House had been built over sacred ground, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead were thinnest. The workers who had toiled to create the masterpiece had spoken of strange occurrences during the night, of voices whispering in forgotten tongues and shadows moving in places where no light should have been. Yet, for all its haunting inhabitants, the opera house thrived. Performances continued, the music soaring through the halls, blending with the voices of the ghosts, creating an eerie yet mesmerizing symphony of the living and the dead. To attend a show at the Étoile Opera House was to risk more than a thrilling evening of culture, it was to brush up against the unknown. And if one was unlucky enough, they might even have to face a pack of sandwich rats, scampering in the shadows, their glowing forms a reminder that in this house of music and magic, nothing was ever truly at rest. The hidden potential of sandwich rats. While most visitors to the Étoile Opera House viewed the sandwich rats as little more than a nuisance, spectral scavengers lurking during intermissions, there were those who had glimpsed their hidden potential. Beneath their grotesque, skeletal appearance and unnerving behavior, these creatures possessed skills far beyond simply pestering unwary guests. Over the years, tales spread of those who had managed to tame the sandwich rats, turning these ghostly vermin into invaluable allies. Though weak in direct confrontation, their utility lay elsewhere, chiefly in their ability to locate hidden objects, transport small items with surprising efficiency, and even trace the scent of their owners across the labyrinthine corridors of the opera house. In the hands of a clever and patient individual, the sandwich rats became more than mere distractions, they became key to unlocking the mysteries of the Étoile. The art of taming sandwich rats. Taming the sandwich rats was no easy feat. These creatures, though spectral, operated with a feral intelligence. It was said that to win their favor, one needed patience, cunning, and a peculiar bond with the strange forces that inhabited the opera house. Those who managed to do so often spoke of a delicate ritual, leaving small offerings, crumbs of bread, bits of cloth, or forgotten trinkets, in the shadows where the rats were known to gather. Over time, the rats would begin to associate the would-be tamer with these offerings, slowly forming a bond built on curiosity and trust. Once the connection was made, the sandwich rats could be coaxed into following simple commands. Their instincts for hunting and scavenging, which had once been a source of torment for guests, became tools of remarkable precision. The rats, capable of squeezing through the narrowest of cracks and climbing into places unreachable by human hands, could fetch small objects or reveal hidden compartments long lost to the opera's twisting halls. The benefits of a tamed pack. The first known instance of a tamer using sandwich rats for personal gain was a former stagehand by the name of Theodore Marceau, who lived during the late 18th century. Marceau had grown fascinated by the strange creatures after witnessing them carting away a piece of bread left behind by a careless guest. Over the course of many months, he studied the sandwich rats in secret, eventually earning their trust with careful feeding and whispered commands. Once tamed, Marceau discovered the true extent of the rats' abilities. Not only could they carry small objects in their teeth with surprising speed and efficiency, but they also possessed an uncanny ability to detect hidden things. The rats could find long-forgotten caches, secret compartments built into the walls, and even hidden safes used by the opera's wealthier patrons to store valuables during performances. One of the most famous stories associated with Marceau was his discovery of a long-lost treasure hidden beneath the stage. It was said that a wealthy noble, seeking to evade taxes, had hidden a fortune in gold and jewels beneath the floorboards decades before. The sandwich rats, guided by Marceau, sniffed out the hidden chamber, leading him to riches that had been thought lost forever. From that day on, Marceau became a legend among the staff, and many whispered that he owed his sudden rise in wealth and status to his spectral allies. Others followed in Marceau's footsteps. Marguerite de Clermont, a costume designer, famously used a tamed pack of sandwich rats to recover misplaced jewels and personal effects lost by the opera's many performers. She built a small fortune by offering her services to the theater's elite, finding everything from missing rings to forgotten notes with uncanny accuracy. Word spread of her strange abilities, and though few dared ask how she managed to locate such items, rumors of her ghostly helpers soon became the stuff of legend. Another curious tale involves Jules Rochefort, a former musician who became obsessed with the idea of using the rats for more sinister purposes. Rochefort attempted to train the rats as a personal army, envisioning a swarm of glowing creatures he could command to overwhelm his enemies within the opera house. Though the rats followed his orders, his ambitions proved flawed. In battle, the sandwich rats were next to useless, too weak to do any real harm, and too easily scattered by the slightest resistance. Instead of becoming the feared general of a ghostly army, Rochefort merely ended up with an annoyance that distracted his opponents for a brief time before dissipating into the shadows. Frustrated, he abandoned the idea altogether, but the legend of his failed attempt lived on as a cautionary tale. The Searchers of the Opera House. Where the sandwich rats truly excelled was in their uncanny ability to locate things by scent. It was said that no matter how well hidden or obscured, if an object had once belonged to someone within the opera house, the rats could find its owner again, provided they were still within the building. This skill made the rats invaluable to those who sought to track down performers, patrons, or even lost lovers in the maze-like corridors of the opera house. Madame Larue, a mysterious figure known only to a select few, was said to have made extensive use of this ability. As the opera's chief informant, she used her tamed sandwich rats to track the movements of high-profile guests, allowing her to gather information on the comings and goings of the most influential figures in society. Her rats would follow the faintest scent trail, creeping through the shadows unnoticed, bringing back reports of whispered conversations and secret rendezvous. It was said that she held enough secrets to ruin half the city, all thanks to her spectral allies. The Rat King, a forgotten legend. Among all the stories of tamed rats and their clever uses, there remains one legend that towers above the rest, the tale of the Rat King. According to ancient lore, the Rat King was a creature of immense power and size, a ghostly rat many times larger than his lesser brethren, ruling over the sandwich rats with a mind far sharper than any human could fathom. The Rat King was said to possess a level of intelligence that bordered on malevolent, capable of orchestrating events within the opera house from the shadows. However, no one had seen the Rat King in decades. Some believed he had vanished, his spirit long since departed. Others whispered that he still lurked deep within the forgotten tunnels beneath the stage, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. A few even claimed that the Rat King had been tamed by someone long ago, and that his power was now under the control of a master who used him for purposes unknown. Whether the Rat King truly existed or was simply a myth, one thing was clear: the sandwich rats, for all their strangeness and ghostly nature, held far more potential than anyone could have imagined. In the right hands, they were more than mere pests. They were the key to unlocking the countless secrets buried within the walls of the Étoile Opera House. And yet, with such power came great danger, for those who sought to control the rats often found themselves drawn deeper into the opera's mysteries, lost in a web of shadows from which few ever truly escaped. The Sorceress and the Flute of the Rat King. The Étoile Opera House, already brimming with whispers of strange creatures and forgotten magics, was about to witness one of its most audacious schemes. In the shadowy corridors and hidden chambers, a young sorceress by the name of Celeste Valois had found herself entangled in the supernatural mysteries of the place. Celeste had always been a cunning and ambitious witch, with a mind as sharp as her mastery of minor magics. But her fate changed when she came across a relic lost for centuries, the flute of the Rat King. The flute, an intricately carved instrument of black wood, bore symbols that shimmered with a faint, ghostly light. Legends spoke of its power over the sandwich rats and their elusive monarch, the Rat King. The sorceress discovered the flute in a hidden chamber deep beneath the opera house, wedged between two stone slabs that looked like they had been undisturbed for ages. With her natural affinity for the arcane, she knew immediately that this was no ordinary relic. She studied it meticulously, her eyes gleaming with possibility. Mastering the rats. It took weeks of experimentation, careful practice, and countless hours hidden in the darkest corners of the opera house, but Celeste soon learned the flute's secrets. The ethereal notes that emanated from it called out to the sandwich rats, stirring them from their usual intermission scurries. At first, it was only a few who responded to her, their glowing forms shivering at her feet like nervous dogs. But over time, as she mastered the haunting melody, more and more rats fell under her thrall, including those from the deepest, forgotten tunnels. Eventually, the Rat King himself emerged. Unlike the smaller sandwich rats, he was massive, a skeletal creature nearly the size of a man, his body glowing with a mix of deep purples and eerie greens. His hollow eye sockets fixed on Celeste with an intelligence that chilled her to the core. But under the spell of the flute, even the mighty Rat King bowed before her, accepting her dominion over him and his subjects. Now, with every last sandwich rat of the opera under her control, Celeste had become the de facto ruler of the haunted creatures. But what could she do with such power? For days, she mulled over various schemes, weighing the risks and rewards. Then, one night, as she watched the opera house fill with excited patrons preparing for the grandest performance of the season, an audacious plan formed in her mind. The grand scheme. It was a night like no other. The performance was one of the most anticipated spectacles in decades, and the opera house was filled to the brim. Nobles, merchants, and influential figures from across the city had gathered in their finest clothes, their spirits high in anticipation of the show. There were several thousand in attendance, packed into the ornate hall with its gilded balconies and glittering chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of perfume, incense, and the hum of excited chatter. But while the audience was focused on the stage, Celeste's eyes were on something else entirely, the wardrobe, where the guests had left their outer garments, some of which were as valuable as the fortunes of small kingdoms. It was there, in the sprawling cloakroom, that the finest furs, enchanted cloaks, and embroidered robes had been deposited. Coats trimmed in silver fox, cloaks enchanted to resist the cold, and even magical robes rumored to grant protection from harm, everything of worth was stored there. As the lights dimmed and the grand overture began, Celeste positioned herself in one of the hidden passageways that connected to the wardrobe. With her flute in hand, she played the summoning tune. From the shadows, the sandwich rats emerged, scurrying in silence toward the wardrobe like a ghostly army. Under her command, the rats swarmed the piles of clothing, their glowing skeletal forms darting back and forth. They grabbed hold of coats and robes with their teeth, dragging them away into the hidden nooks and crannies of the opera house. The audience, enraptured by the performance, remained completely unaware of the chaos happening just beneath their noses. The discovery and the ransom. It wasn't until the final notes of the performance echoed through the grand hall, and the crowd began to make their way toward the exits, that the true scope of Celeste's audacious heist became clear. As patrons approached the wardrobe to retrieve their belongings, panic began to spread. Coats were missing, enchanted cloaks had disappeared, and the wardrobe itself looked as if it had been ransacked by unseen hands. The opera house staff, baffled and alarmed, scrambled to control the crowd, but it was too late. Thousands of nobles, merchants, and guests soon discovered that their valuable outerwear had vanished without a trace. Then, as the confusion reached a fever pitch, Celeste made her appearance. She stepped out of the shadows, her dark robes billowing behind her as she stood atop a grand staircase, her voice cutting through the chaos. "If you wish to see your precious garments again," she called out, "you will pay me a ransom. A fair exchange, for I know exactly where your beloved items are hidden." The crowd gasped. Some of the guests immediately recognized the young sorceress, a minor figure in the magical community but clearly far more dangerous than she appeared. With the Rat King and his ghostly swarm still lurking in the bowels of the opera house, no one dared to defy her. For the next hour, Celeste haggled with the wealthiest members of the audience, demanding gold, silver, and gemstones in exchange for the return of their valuables. Many nobles, unwilling to risk losing their enchanted robes or precious heirlooms, begrudgingly handed over their wealth. Pockets were emptied, jewels were offered, and even enchanted items passed into her hands as the crowd grew increasingly desperate. Some had left magical robes in the wardrobe, garments that were irreplaceable, making the ransom even more painful to bear. With each transaction, the sorceress grew richer, while the crowd grew angrier, but none dared cross her. They had seen what the sandwich rats could do, and they feared that without her guidance, their possessions would be lost forever in the labyrinth of the opera house. A grand escape. As the last payments were made, Celeste kept her end of the bargain, though not without a final twist. Using her control over the rats, she had them drag the clothing from their hiding places deep within the opera's forgotten lower levels. But the retrieval was slow and haphazard, with some items returning in disarray, while others never returned at all. Many patrons found that their clothing had been slightly chewed, frayed, or dirtied by the rats, adding insult to injury. By the time the audience had finally retrieved what remained of their belongings, Celeste had slipped away into the night, her purse heavy with gold and enchanted treasures. The sandwich rats dispersed back into the shadows, once again unseen and untraceable, their role in the heist complete. No one knew where the sorceress disappeared to after her daring crime, but rumors spread quickly through the city. Some said she fled to the distant mountains, living in luxury off her ill-gotten gains. Others claimed she had taken up residence in another grand opera house far away, waiting for her next opportunity. The opera house management tried in vain to track her down, but it was as though she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but fear and legends. The legacy of the flute. The tale of Celeste Valois and her theft became part of the opera's long history, retold as both a cautionary tale and an example of what the sandwich rats, and the mysterious flute of the Rat King, could truly accomplish in the hands of one with the will to command them. Whispers of the flute's whereabouts persisted for years, and treasure hunters scoured the opera house's forgotten tunnels, hoping to find the relic for themselves. But neither the flute nor Celeste was ever seen again, and the sandwich rats returned to their usual spectral mischief during intermissions, awaiting the next daring soul who might seek to control them. The Etoile Opera House had seen many schemes and strange events in its time, but none quite like the heist of the sorceress and her army of glowing, skeletal rats.